Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and on this episode we're doing It Came From The Net. If you've been following this month for It Came From The Network, we do have a theme. The theme for March is basically Happy Birthday to George. We're going to cover things that I consider some of my favorite things, whether it be a wrestler, a promotion, an angle, a gimmick, a match. We started off the month, I covered a WWE show at the Philadelphia Spectrum that I actually attended as a kid. This time, we're going to go to my favorite promotion of all time that highlights one of my favorite feuds of all time. We're going back to the Extreme. We're going back to the corner of Swanson and Rittner to the ECW Arena for CyberSlam 1997. If you haven't seen my shows before, I do rate everything on a 1 to 5 scale, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. I will say with a caveat, ECW is my favorite promotion. It's my favorite time in wrestling history. So I may be a little bit biased, so your rating may be a little lower than mine, but this is how I rate it. I'm just going to put that out there in the beginning. We start the show with a tag team match. We have the Eliminators, Perry Saturn and John Cronus, going up against Rob Van Dam and Sabu in a tables and ladders match. Now this is a tables and ladders match. 2 full years before tables, ladders, and chairs. Just saying. Just pointing it out there. I've long mentioned how the Hardy Boys borrowed very much from Rob Van Dam and Sabu, and this is a match that you could see some of that in. You could see some of the things that the Hardy Boys did here with Rob Van Dam and Sabu. And the Eliminators, probably one of the most underrated tag teams of all time, mostly because they were only a team in ECW, and I think they worked in Memphis as well and some Boston independents. But they were so good. They were so synchronized. And the way they wrestled and the way they had their tag team maneuvers, it reminded me a lot of the Young Bucks. The synchronicity that they have at times. This is such a fun match. I mean, we have 2 great tag teams here. Ultimately, the Eliminators do pick up the win. Afterwards, they shake Sabu's hand. Rob Van Dam refuses to shake their hand, which was kind of his gimmick at the time. He didn't have respect for anybody. Sabu forced him to respect him, and that's how they became a team. This is a good match and a great way to start the show. I'm giving this one a 4. Next up, we have an in-ring interview with the Pitbulls being interviewed by Joey Styles. This is to hype up the return of Pitbull Gary Wolf, aka Pitbull number 1, who had been out with a neck injury. They're talking about the feud that they have with Shane Douglas is in the Crow's Nest area of the ECW arena, which is kind of where Joey Styles would sit to call the action from. And he basically calls him out, tells him to come up there, fight him. He has a crutch, he's injured, but he's willing to fight. They go up to the Crow's Nest, end up getting attacked by Douglas, Chris Candido, and Brian Lee, who at the time were the triple threat. This was fun and chaotic and everything you would expect from ECW. I really enjoyed this segment. It gave us a reason to look forward to the Pitbulls coming back into the tag team action and to continue their feud with Shane Douglas. Just a fun segment here. Next up, we have Little Guido with Wildfire Tommy Rich going up against Chris Chetty, the super rookie, the first graduate of the House of Hardcore. And Chetty's one of those guys that's kind of sad that ECW went away and WCW went away, because I think Chris Chetty could have been so much more than what he was. He was building slowly in ECW, and even here you could see he had some of the beginnings to be a good wrestler. His charisma and his personality started coming out towards the end of ECW more than it did here. I feel like in another 2 or 3 years, Chetty would have put it all together and became a big star in the company. Unfortunately, he didn't have another couple of years left. Chris Chetty does pick up the win, where Tommy Rich tries to convince Little Guido to go to the top rope, which is not his specialty. He misses the move. Chetty gets a win. Afterwards, we have a little bit of tension between Guido and Tommy Rich. This was very much in the beginning of Tommy Rich becoming a full-blooded Italian and talking about having relatives that lived there and worked for the mafia but had to move. Just a fun little thing here. Tommy Rich was great on the microphone here. I'm going to give this match a 3. I thought it was a good match, fun show. I love Guido. Just a great talent. That match is followed up with some more ECW mainstays. We have Balls Mahoney going up against Stevie Richards. This was right at the height of the BWO, which started as a parody and ended up becoming its own thing. Stevie was Big Stevie Cool, basically a takeoff on Kevin Nash. Blue Meanie was the blue guy. a takeoff on Scott Hall, and Supernova was Hollywood Nova, take off on Hulk Hogan. The BWO is there with him. This is another good match, and Stevie, again, much like Chetty, I don't know why Stevie didn't go much further in his career. He had everything I think you could have had to become a big star. He was good in the ring, he could talk well, he had a great look to him. I just don't think that anybody other than Paul Heyman ever really believed in him. This was another good match. I wouldn't say it was a great match. Stevie does pick up the win here. I'm giving this one a 3. That's followed up with Balls Mahoney's most famous partner, Axel Rotten versus Spike Dudley. This is when Axel was still a heel, and I kind of forgot that he was a heel during this time frame, because so much of Axel's career, to me, is tied with him and Balls as the hardcore chair swinging freaks, or previously, the Bad Breed era of Axel. This is when he had a loose affiliation with the Dudley Boys, Bubba Ray and Devon. I have to say that because there's 15 Dudleys in ECW. And Devon and Axel actually were a tag team for a bit. This is a good match. The Dudley Boys come out and get involved, basically help Axel pick up the win. I'm giving this a 3. Again, it's entertaining, it's good, it's not great. I enjoyed it though. Afterwards, Axel and the Dudley Boys are beating up on Spike when we hear the fake music for the Gangstas, New Jack and Mustafa. They come out, they start brawling with the Dudley Boys, which leads us right into a match. Dudley Boys versus the Gangstas with Axel and getting involved a little bit. I really enjoyed this. This was just a brawl. I mean, it's kind of what you would think of when you think of ECW. It's all over the arena. They're doing crazy stuff to each other. There's tables, there's chairs. New Jack dives off of the crow's nest, which I think was his first dive in ECW. It feels like it might have been. He may have did more before that. I'm not 100% sure on that. But it's a classic spot where New Jack dives through a table, dives through someone on a table. Dudley Boys, in my opinion, the best tag team of all time, and really showing it here. This was an extremely fun match, even though it's just a wild brawl. Up until this point, this was my favorite thing on the show. This and the first match for 2 totally different reasons. I really enjoyed this. The Dudley Boys do pick up the win here. I'm giving this one a 4. Next up, we have Taz going up against the ECW debuting Tracy Smothers. And not long after this, Tracy would join up with Tommy Wildfire Rich and Little Guido to fill out the rest of that incarnation of the FBI. This was Taz at his absolute peak in ECW. He was a destroyer. He was running through people. No one really stood a chance against him. And he was booked so perfectly here. Think of this as if Samoa Joe nowadays had the Goldberg push of WCW. And then you have Taz. That's basically what he was. This is another fun match. I rather enjoyed it. Obviously, Taz picks up the win here. I'm giving this a 3. Next up, we have the main reason why I picked this show. Raven and Primetime Brian Lee, who was a bulldozer for hire, going up against Terry Funk and Tommy Dreamer. And one of the stipulations in this was if Funk could get the win on Raven or win in any way, he would get the world title shot at the upcoming pay-per-view Barely Legal. So part of the psychology of this is Tommy Dreamer hadn't beat Raven yet. He still hadn't got that decisive victory. So Raven, as part of his genius psychological warfare, he tried to goat Tommy Dreamer on. He said, I'm going to lay down for you. You want that pin? You've wanted this for 2 years. You've wanted this since we've been in summer camp. And this is what I mean when I talk about the story of Tommy Dreamer and Raven and the little twists and turns. There's so much here because you can feel the agony in Tommy Dreamer. Does he take this pin that he won? If he does, he screws his mentor out of a world title shot. Hell, Terry Funk is telling him to take it. Take that shot. Get what you've been dreaming for. Tommy just can't pull himself to do it. This is a really good match. They isolate Terry Funk and he gets injured, which leaves Dreamer out there alone, which then we see Tyler Fullington, aka the Sandman's son, who had previously been used by Raven in their feud and taken to join Raven's side. He comes out in a BWO shirt, bringing Tommy back to the ring when Terry is injured. Then he goes back and he brings out his father for the reunion of Tyler Fullington, his mother Lori, who was the Sandman's wife or ex-wife at the time, and the Sandman. So that story is carried on here. Sandman reunites with his son. Stevie Richards comes out, who had previously been a flunky for Raven. At one point, Raven even dares him to super kick him, but before he could get the super kick in, Brian Lee stops him and chokeslam. There's so much story development and so much building here, and it's all weaved together. Funk versus Raven, Sandman versus Raven, Stevie Richards versus Raven, which if you've seen Barely Legal, those three, Stevie Richards, Sandman, Terry Funk, were in a three-way match where the winner got the opportunity to face Raven for the World Championship. This is interesting, and it's very much an ECW thing here, because Sandman does pick up the win on Raven, thus winning for the team of Funk and Dreamer. There's some things about the ECW logic that you just kind of have to accept. For me, the storytelling, the ongoing feud between Dreamer and Raven, the feuds between Raven and the other three men, Brian Lee as the bulldozer for hire. I mean, there's so much story being told here. This was absolutely fantastic. I'm giving this a 5. Like I said, I might be biased, but this was great in my opinion. Then we get to the main event of our evening. We have Chris Candido, who's calling out Sabu. And basically he's saying that Sabu, you could do all these crazy things, but can you wrestle? Which was very interesting. And the cool thing about this is on commentary, Joey Styles, who's a fantastic commentator, he gives us a backstory that Chris Candido's 24, which puts us at 97, which means Chris Candido was in his early 30s when he passed away, which was really sad when I thought about that in my head. But he's only 24 here, and at that time he had already been a WWE Tag Team Champion, an ECW Tag Team Champion, an NWA World Champion, a Smoky Mountain Tag Team Champion. I mean, he was already an accomplished wrestler by the age of 24. And Candido's one of those guys that kind of gets forgotten in time, but he was absolutely great. He was a fantastic talent. Now we're going to talk about the other man, Sabu. And I've went on record ranting and raving on how important I think that Sabu is to wrestling. And getting to watch Sabu here, in his prime, in ECW, where he could thrive, and where he has no limitations on what he could do. The only thing limiting Sabu was what he could think of. Watching him here is like watching Van Gogh paint. This is like watching Sonic Youth in the late 80s play in a club for 1,000 people, but put out some of the most groundbreaking music of that decade. This was getting to sit in the director's chair with Quentin Tarantino while he makes Reservoir Dogs or Pulp Fiction. You are treated to a true artist in Sabu here. And watching this and seeing the energy and his brain, you could see him go from move to move and just what he thinks in his head. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't, but that was part of the beauty of it. He was willing to take chances that nobody else would, and that everybody else would imitate after he did them. Sabu was such an innovator, and this is Sabu in his prime, or as close to his prime as you're going to find him. I absolutely recommend this match very highly, and I think it's absolutely fantastic, and that's between both men. Candido as well. Candido is great here. This is a fantastic main event. Sabu does pick up the win here, getting the respect of Chris Candido afterwards. I thought this was absolutely awesome. I'm giving this one a 5. As you could guess by the tone of what I'm saying here and the reverence I speak of a lot of these wrestlers, I was very high on this, and I still am very high on this. I think this is a really fun show. This is a really good thing to go back and watch, and really for someone like myself that loved ECW and was tuning in every week and was buying the tapes, this would have been a tape that they actually would have chopped this up for their weekly television show, but they would have put out a tape of all 3 episodes as one. Just going back and watching this and watching the greatness, it just brings that back out of you. Seeing the Eliminators, seeing Van Dam and Sabu. The great tag division here. You have the Eliminators, Van Dam, Sabu, the Pitbulls, the Dudley Boys, the Gangsters. I mean, that's a bunch of teams right there. And we're not even talking about Balls and Axel that became a team. A Funk and Dreamer who were sometimes team. Little Guido and Tracy Smothers who would become a great team together. Seeing some of the great gimmicks in ECW, whether it be the BWO, the FBI, the Human Suplex Machine Taz, the Homicidal Genocidal Maniac Sabu. No gimmicks needed, Chris Candido. The Dreamer and Raven feud, the Raven and Sandman feud. There is so much of what made ECW great on this show. I really enjoyed this. I'm going to give it overall a 4. Some of the matches were just okay. And to peel back the curtain, with my ratings since they're 1 to 5, I basically start at a 3. I go into every match as a 3. Are you going to make me bring it up? Are you going to make me bring it down? Or are you just going to be there and be like, okay, that wasn't great, it wasn't bad, It's just right in the middle. There are a couple matches on the show I would say are right on the middle, and probably if I did percentage, there are a couple that are probably more than a 3, but they're closer to a 3 than a 4, in my opinion. But I digress. It's still a great show. The sum of the parts is really good. I recommend highly going back and watching this. With that being said, let's smash that like button, share the video, subscribe if you haven't. If you see where it says join, that's how you become a channel member. Becoming a channel member definitely helps me out. And if you made it to the end here, give me an ECW in the comments, or ECW, whatever you want. Let's give love to the company that I love so much. And I'm so happy that they're putting Paul Heyman in the Hall of Fame in Philadelphia, because that response is going to be insane. I'd love to be there. Unfortunately, I can't afford to take the time off or to fly there and all that as well. But I would love to have been there to see Paul Heyman go into the Hall of Fame in Philadelphia. That's going to be insane. That's going to be nuts. But anyway, I digress. With all that being said, my name is George Cole, and you've been watching It Came From the Network.